Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the iWorkinSport live interview. My name is João Fugerio. I'm the founder of iWorkinSport, and first of all, I want to thank you for being here with us today. As you know, the iWorkinSport live interview is the show when we bring accomplished sport business professionals to share their knowledge, experience, tips, and advice in order to help you succeed in your career. Today is special episode. As you know, this week we've been doing our Meet the Programs new series, bringing representatives of some of the programs that will be at the iWorkinSport Education Virtual Expo. That's the ad that you just saw. And the interview today with Bettina Cornwell from the University of Oregon was already pre-scheduled for a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, we had to rebook it. And but when we decided to do this week, and the University of Oregon announced that they would be participating in that event with us, we thought that would fit very well to have her this week with us. So we're going to introduce Bettina in just 1 minute. I want to remind you that this is normally a very interactive session. You have been participating throughout the week and leaving your questions. Please feel free to do so. You're encouraged to do so. Participate. We're going to go to that. Before we go to Bettina, just to mention a little bit more on the events that will happen in 2 weeks, really, from the 10th to the 12th of November. It's a completely digital event, and it's aimed to anyone that is interested in starting a career in sport, or even if you're already working in sport and you want to boost your career, improve your career through education. That is for you. So we're going to have representatives from some of the best sports management programs in the world there, and you'll be able to interact with them in real time, face-to-face, digitally, right? But there's video calls, so don't miss it. It is completely free to attend. There's a link in the description if you want to go and register to that. So really recommend that you do that. Now, this week we had on Monday a representative from the Johan Cruyff Institute, yesterday from the European Sport Business School in Valencia, ESBS. You can watch the replays later if you want. Today, we're going to talk to Bettina. As I said, we were planning to talk specifically about her book and more focus on sponsorship, but we will have the opportunity maybe to talk about the programs as well. And tomorrow we will have a representative from the FIFA Master. We'll talk with Kevin Talek Marston, a good friend of mine. So before we go to Bettina, just remind you, if you're interested in this type of content, in career in sports, in education, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, right? And hit that bell icon to get our notifications as well. And if you're ready on YouTube and want to hit that like button, that will be super cool and appreciate it. Now, to talk about her brand new book. Actually, it's a republish of a book called Sponsorship in Marketing, Effective Partnerships in Sports, Arts, and Events. We're going to invite Bettina Cornwell. She's the Film Night Chair and Head of Department of Marketing at the Lundquist College of Business at the University of Oregon. It's a mouthful, but I'll let her introduce herself a little better. I'll call Bettina in right after this. Hello, Bettina.
Hello.
Thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
Great. It's great to have you here. Now I think it's just past 10 a.m. in Oregon, right? There was a small confusion with the time today because the time changes here in Europe this weekend, and apparently didn't in the US yet.
Yeah, we have another week or so, and then it changes. All
Great.
good in the end, though.
Great. Bettina, just before we start, just to give you a sense of everybody who's watching people connect from all over the world, we have Coach Abdul. He's been with us every episode this week, so I know he's in South Africa. José Luis from Santos, a special guest. Jimmy Castillo, actually, hello, Jimmy. I need to thank you. So before we continue, seeing where people are watching from, I want to give a shout out to Jimmy, and also say how wonderful this experience has been in talking live with guests, but with incredible audience. We feel that we're forming a community here. I see people helping each other. They leave questions in the comments and people answer that as well. So that's super encouraged. And just to tell a story, I didn't really know Bettina sort of before. I invited to the show some of the people that I've known for many years, but actually I got to you, Bettina, right? And through Jimmy. So he was watching the show, someone that's known for a few years, and mentioned, he came back to me and said, João, I've been in touch with this lady at the University of Oregon. She wrote this amazing book on sponsorship. It was the best one I read on the topic. And I think she would be a great guest. And I already talked to her about you, and she said she would be happy to do it. So that's how it started. So big thank you to Jimmy to facilitating that. Just a few more. We have Yuri Dominguez in São Paulo, Gabriel Liberati there as well, Santiago in Colombia, Miguel Aruz in Ecuador. Mamé Paulo is a special guest. She's my mom watching from Brazil. There's Cesar in São Paulo, Jesse in Cape Town, Kumar in Nepal. So Michelle from Mexico. So we're talking to an international audience, Bettina.
Very good.
Before we start, I would actually ask you to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started to work. I know that you work in marketing in general, not specifically sort of in sport, but you have developed a lot of work in sports and in sponsorship in particular. So maybe you can tell us a bit about your career.
Yeah. So my career through sport is probably not the one the audience is most interested in, because you don't want to end up as an academic maybe. But my own experience was that I was interested in marketing, and in ways it brought me into communications and advertising and sponsorship, because it's one of the major platforms in communications these days. So I started with my undergrad in marketing. My MBA is more international business, and then I have a PhD that's also in marketing and in cognitive psychology. But it was this moment after I was already an academic when I met at an event the VP from Volvo North America. And he said to me, I'd really like to know more about how to measure sponsorship. And the CEO at the time said, look, the demographics of the typical tennis player match very much the demographics of the Volvo driver. And wouldn't it be great to do all kinds of things in tennis? And it ended up being really a good idea. But the thing that they couldn't figure out, and the thing that we still wrestle with in sports sponsorship, is how to measure it. And that was the curiosity that sort of launched my interest in sponsorship and brought me closer to sport.
Right, and that was when exactly? Because you've been doing this for some time now, has many articles published.
That was a long time ago. That was when they were filling Volvos with tennis balls and having you guess how many tennis balls were in the Volvo as an activation.
Right, right. Just so you have, I don't know if you know José or José Gigante, but he says you're a rock star. Every day, yes,
Nice.
every day we learn from her in social and academic publications. Thank you, José or José.
Made my day.
Oh, there's someone else here who read your book, Michele Tiozzo. Also says that it's a great book. We're going to talk about that. There's just some more people saying hello from Tehran. Mohammad Reza. Tilo from in the US, in Brooklyn.
I'm glad you got the right time.
With us every day this week. Thanks we appreciate that, friend. From Dublin.
Nice.
Yes, and there's someone else here, Miguel from Angola. So we're pretty much
around the world.
Us everywhere. Bettina, before we go more into the sponsorship specifically in some topics of your book, and I also have to say that not only the things that you have in your book, but I checked your YouTube channel that is super informative as well for anyone that is interested in that topic of sponsorship. I recommend it. There's a link in the description if you're watching it on YouTube as well, so you can go and check those videos out later. Tell us a little about the sports management or sports programs at the University of Oregon, especially the ones that will be presented at the Education Virtual Expo in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, so we have quite the sport business offering, but we also have a broader base in sport at the University of Oregon. So in the Lundquist College of Business, in the Eugene campus here where I am, in the beautiful Willamette Valley, I might add, we have the undergraduate program. So it's a 4-year undergraduate typical kind of program. We also have recently launched a minor for those undergraduates. So let's say you're an athlete and you want to imagine developing your own personal brand. So we have a sport business minor for those people who might be interested in their name, image, likeness, and how to develop that as an influencer. We have a master's degree, an MBA with a specialty in sport marketing, and that's very strongly associated with our Warsaw Sport Marketing Center, which is a center for experiential learning and student engagement within the business school. We have programs in Portland, Oregon, which is just a couple of hours drive away. And in Portland, we have the Sport Product Management Program. It's been amazingly successful, as well as now recently launched a sport product management, sport product development program for design that's been launched as an online program. So it's really targeting people who are already in the sport industry and active working professionals. Yeah, so as well, here at the University of Oregon, the journalism program has an interest in sports, and, for example, sports business broadcasting, and as well, there's more here in the product design area. Yeah.
Right. Great. So I'll tell sort of everyone watching that if you want to send questions about the programs as well, you can. Please bear in mind that Bettina may not have all the information about administrative stuff, but in that case, you'll be welcome to come to the event. As I said, it's free, but you can certainly leave your question here, and we'll try to address anything that you want to know about the sports management programs in the University of Oregon, which, by the way, sorry?
We'll do our best.
Yes. So, which, by the way, for whoever knows a bit of the story of Nike and read Phil Knight's book Shoe Dog, the university played a big role there. And can you just tell us a little about that sort of relationship with Nike and your chair of Phil Knight's chair? So maybe you want to tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. So at the University of Oregon, there are 32 Phil Knight chairs. So he's very interested in supporting faculty and research. We also have opening almost, sort of in the process, except for the pandemic. The Phil Knight campus, which is a science-oriented campus and science application. The grant to develop that campus, which is adjacent, across the street, adjacent to the University of Oregon and part of our system, was the largest grant to a public university ever in the history. So it's quite the amazing campus. And as well, he's supported other things, our law school. And if you've not seen it, you might take a look at the Matt Knight Arena, basketball arena, which was in memory of his son. And it's a perfectly amazing arena. And if you haven't seen it, you need to see the floor because it's in sort of a wood grain forest and spectacular, just very, very unique. So there was a lot of gifts from Phil Knight and family to the University of Oregon, and we're very grateful.
Cool. Anyway, that's definitely a book I recommend as well. I want to know.
I saw him talk about that, and it was actually a great interview. Yeah.
So let's talk about your book. Actually, just before we do that, I want to give a shout out to a friend, Cesar Sbrighi. He is one of the pioneers of really studying sponsorship in Brazil. Wrote one of the first books in the field in Brazil, I think over 20 years ago. So Cesar, it's nice to see that you're watching us from São Paulo, I guess. Now, about your book, so sponsorship in marketing, effective partnerships in sports, arts, and events. You had a slight change of in the title there, but can you maybe give us then a summary of the book and maybe tell us why you decided to write it?
So I've been teaching the sponsorship in the sponsorship area for some time now, and for a long time I struggled because we had really good academic research coming out that maybe was a bit too technical for the typical person to enjoy reading. We'll leave it that way. And then we had sort of lots of popular press pieces that were fun, but they didn't have enough depth. And I kept struggling to find the balance in that. And I just said, I have to write a book that helps me to teach about this topic in a better fashion. So it has, the book has both practical information, but also sort of translated research and palatable research that you can understand what's happening in terms of cutting edge information that just doesn't get into the media. And that, I think, makes it a different book than some of the how-to books that are out there. And it was sort of my bridge between industry and academic life.
Okay, all right. Um, so I was checking. I didn't read the book yet. So I went through the executive summary, had a look at the main topics, and then there is sponsorship linked marketing. There
Mm.
is one of the terms that's it's featured in one of the chapters, I think. So about that sponsorship linked marketing, what is it exactly?
So I coined that term to help me because I think that sponsorship is a word that some people wanted to discard, and it makes life easier in business to keep the word sponsorship to refer to this type of contract and this type of relationship, because partnerships, which this sponsorship becomes, it describes a lot of things like greenfield investments and co-branding and where companies come together, joint relationships. There are a lot of things that are partnerships. So to clarify the space a bit, and it needs that word sponsorship in there, I changed the title of the book to read Partnerships. It used to read slightly differently, to read Partnerships, because so many people think of these as partnerships.
Right.
And then sponsorship linked marketing is to take into consideration that it's not this deal that's cut between a sponsoring brand and a sports property that matters. It's actually everything that transpires, all of the activation and leveraging. By the way, I put those into two buckets. I don't call those the same thing. Leveraging for me is all of the money spent, and activation is that money spent that's two-way interaction and engaging.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that is what sponsorship linked marketing is. And the sponsorship is just the contract or the deal.
Is activation within leveraging? Is it part of it?
I consider it that way. So leveraging is everything that you do to bring the brand forward, but it could include sort of, one-way additional advertising spending after the contract. That is, it's maybe even thematically tied to the sponsorship, maybe not, but in the program, placed in the program. But that doesn't give you the same thing that activation does. And when I think of them as two buckets, then I analyze them as two buckets, and I say, well, this sponsorship activation, this engagement was more successful, let's say, than this advertising related thematically tied program. I want to do more of that in the future. So in order to understand what it is I need to do more of, I need to account for those kinds of leveraging differently.
Okay. Right. Just want to remind everyone that if you have questions, I see that there is already a few there, but keep them coming. We're going to address them in a moment. I would like to know, I like the product placement there, the Oregon mug. Uh, Looks neat. I need to do a iWorkinSport mug as well for me. Anyway.
Very good. We'll work on that.
And another thing that in my research, also going through sort of some of your videos, a good question that arose was, how can a sponsor implement a successful sponsorship to achieve the communication and engagement objectives? So how can they do that? And then I was thinking, as well as maybe a second part of the question, is that is if actually defining those objectives is also a big part of the challenge.
That is so true. I couldn't agree with you more. Finding the objectives, defining them, having everyone agree that this is what they are and here is how we'll address them is a huge starting point. So one of the things that I needed to do in the book, and also with the YouTube videos, because I especially important to me, is that other people can use the material, for free, and put it into a course or training that's useful to them, but that it works around the world. And different regions in the world are at different levels of development in terms of sponsorship. And so you have some regions that are still very much interested in signage, and it's still all about the background, signs that can be placed. And some are more interested in engagement. So you have to have something where you can talk to all of the levels of sponsorship that are out there. And so when it comes to how do you begin, that part to me is easy all around the world. You ask yourself, what are the overlapping values between your brand and the sport? And then you build objectives that make sense for those overlapping values. And you ought not, in my opinion, to enter into a relationship where you don't have that starting point. So then the brand needs to identify what it is they believe they could accomplish, and the sport property needs to be sensitive to saying we can do these things, we can't do those things, and to agree upon what those objectives will be before you get started.
Right. No, it definitely makes a lot of sense. There is, so as I said, questions arriving here. There's one from Jesse Runderhoff. I don't know what Learfield is, but maybe you can explain that. Does University of Oregon work with Learfield?
So the University of Oregon has a relationship that, I don't know if you know, Learfield is began in developing sort of opportunities for universities to promote themselves to brands, in a sense.
So what is Learfield exactly?
Say again?
What is Learfield?
Yeah, so they're an organization, and we're actually with IMG, so that might answer the question right away. That way, but what they were doing. Let me take us back just a little in history to make it clear. So, only a decade ago, if a brand wanted to work with a university, they would have to go to the university and develop a contract to say, here's what we'd like to do. Can you agree with it? Can we use your logos and marks, and how would it work? And each one of those universities might have a different vision for how they might work with a brand. And so what you found groups like IMG and Learfield doing, were saying, okay, we can be the go-between for you and develop a set of understandings, a set of contracts, brokering, if you will, the relationship. And what IMG did in, I think, the most profound way was to develop a set of relationships so you could have, as a brand, a national buy in collegiate sports. So you could buy a relationship, a sponsorship relationship with a group of brands of your choosing through just working with them versus going to each college and negotiating a contract. So that sort of leveled up the sponsorship relationships with collegiate sport in the United States. And as you probably well know, collegiate sports is a different sort of thing in the United States than you would find it as team sports in other countries, in Australia or in the UK or something like that. It's very different. And so this made the ability, offered the ability of a national buy with one negotiating relationship.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, it's definitely important to point out, if not everyone is familiar with the collegiate sports in the US, it is, for everyone that is not in the US, it's a bit weird. You see, the biggest stadiums belong to universities. You have football games for over 100,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're all amateurs or really can't be paid. It's
that is changing with the new legislation begun in California with the new name, image, and likeness legislation that will allow them to make money while a student. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely overdue. So just a few more people saying hi. So Walter Spencer says hi from Uruguay, and Paulini Alves, I think she's in Austria or in Germany. Hello, Paulini. Thanks for being there. There's Azif from Bangladesh.
Thank you.
Regina in Brazil saying hi as well. Great to have everyone there with us, and Mohammed from Dubai. It's great to have you guys with us. Now, you actually participated in one of our interviews a few weeks ago when we had Misha share in the
That's
show.
really good.
And thank you. And you brought up an interesting topic, of course, about technology. And I don't remember exactly what was the question that you asked, but I think was more or less in this line. So I'm kind of going to give that question sort of back to you. How has the technology impacted sponsorship lately?
Yeah, so my question to Mishi was talking about how sport teams interact with their fans, and there's a discussion of the creativity of that interaction. I think that's paramount. But we'd also have to say at some point, sometimes it's about the ease of that relationship. How easy is it for me to engage in this, augmented reality moment? How convenient is it for me to use this app for a dozen different things or just for one thing? And I think teams around the world, I can certainly see in the United States, are playing with high tech to the degree that they can afford it, and exploring augmented reality, exploring virtual reality, exploring a lot of things that make the news. But they're oftentimes not put together as an integrated strategy, and they're not, sometimes they're not connected to a larger relationship and a continuous story. And so the one-offs, I think, are not probably to the sport team's advantage, even if it is supported by a brand and sponsorship. And it's more, how do I make this an integrated relationship that allows people probably to create content and to share content in that tech space. And there's a recent paper that's published in Marketing. And again, this is one of those situations where the research wouldn't reach a lot of the people that need it. But that research looked across 9 contexts and showed that people in the moment, for example, at the one of the contexts was the Super Bowl, in the moment when they're creating and they're generating content and sharing that content while watching the game, that they feel more immersed and they enjoy the game more. And that their feeling of the time that passes becomes collapsed. And you've heard the phrase, time flies when you're having fun, right? And that perception of time is another indicator that it's working to make them enjoy that experience more. So if you wrap your hand around all of that research for a moment, then I really don't want to do too much that doesn't also engage the fans such that they get to build their own content or share content or comment on content in some way.
Right. Pointed out, I think there's so many also changes in that landscape, and also I was defining KPIs are completely different than what they were, the things that you measure. And that brings me to a follow-up of that question. It has to do with how you measure sort of the return on investments. And I saw in your classes that you have other returns of objectives and returns of investment is one of them. That has always been very, very tricky for everyone working with sponsorship. People back in the day would basically measure, the time that your brand would appear in the screen, and then it's okay, if I paid money to have my brand appearing in that channel for that long, that you convert the media time or that marketing time, which probably it's not the best way to do it, and it's old. And now technology, I think, provides you so many other KPIs and ways to measure them as well much more effectively. Can you maybe elaborate on what's new in that area and how measuring return on investment and sponsorship got more accurate with technology?
Well, what you refer to is the advertising equivalency measure. So whatever sponsorship exposure I received is equated to the advertising what it would have cost you to place an ad for those 30 seconds, 8 seconds, 10 seconds. And that's not a good measure. It's an old measure, developed, I think, originally by Joyce Julius, but also brought forward when Replicon was doing that sort of thing and all of that. But it is still alive, and the tech for it is higher and better, and there are still companies that use it. So again, in the serving all of the possible students and audiences, I talk about advertising equivalency because chances are you may encounter it, not because it's a good measure, but because it's a historical measure and people have used it and they continue to use it oftentimes as a benchmark, and it's out there. So, but there are other measures we'd like to see, and the problem is that they oftentimes require a bit more investment. And if you really think about what brand is doing a fantastic job in sponsorship and in their measurement, it tends to be brands that have access to information such that they know what's going on. A perfect example would be Visa. So they have a great deal of information. And when you start buying around a sponsorship activation of theirs, they know it. And they understand more about what's happening in their sponsorships and what's effective than another industry category that would have a lag between the sponsorship experience and the brand usage. So a car, how the distance between those is, you may buy that. You may fall in love with it at a moment, but you may not buy it for 6 months or a year or even ever. You want an Alfa Romeo, but you can't buy one, right? So the idea that there's better measurement and better tracking out there, absolutely. Can every brand utilize it? Not readily. But can they utilize it if they invest? Probably. So brands that don't have that steady stream of information have to probably invest in primary data collection and study the sponsorship relationship and learn what's going on. And I advocate for that regularly.
Right, and I suppose as well that that also has to do with the objectives that they have. I mean, if some of them are actually, getting you subscribers or people to sign up to your mailing list, this is definitely something that you track much better than sales. There's and the type of sales that you make. If you do online sales, it's probably much easier to track and to get all the information that you want than if you actually do it in a physical store. So Jesse Rundelhoff is very active, and he's been showing interest in that topic since earlier this week. So there's another question from him here, and I think that he's working with schools. Actually, Jesse, if you want to later give us a bit more information on the text, give us context of what you're doing, because you asked about schools. I think yesterday as well. So anyway, his question is, if schools would like to start a sponsorship program, and I mean a group of schools, I suppose, for the first time, is it a good idea to have a combined sponsorship program or one for each school?
Yeah, that's sort of an interesting question. At the university level, the idea is typically where will the student go and what do they need to be successful. So, for example, from the journalism school, individuals there learn more about sort of broadcast rights and media and their own, limitations or capabilities in covering a topic as a journalist, and on and on. We don't cover anything about that really in the business school, but we cover more about accounting and finance and project planning and things like that. So in that sense, the school by school is, if you do mean schools in terms of disciplines, makes sense. If I'm interpreting that word school differently to mean various institutions across domains, there probably is some value in coming together to offer a program, especially if those schools might be small and they're trying to put something together in this area, and they can all come together to form a consortium that considers what it is they're going to do for the students and how they're going to progress them in their careers.
Yes, I'm imagining here a scenario where the schools can collaborate in a way or participate together in a way to be able to put a sponsorship package together. So in my head, I have a kind of a league type of thing where you bring sports clubs that are actually rivals, but then sort of together they do packages sort of together, such as the Major League Baseball or the NBA or something like that. Now, some questions are coming in, Bettina. So there's a very interesting one here from Mohammed Ernesh about pricing, right? Sponsorship in sponsorship, right? There are many tools that you use to make sure it's the right price. How actually do you price sponsorship? I think this is what he's trying to know. Can you tell us? I mean, your study in your book, I don't know if you mention methods or tools that are used for it.
So of all the topics that I receive calls or emails on, pricing's the number one. And, we have an amphitheater for operating on patients with glass windows in a hospital, and we want a sponsor for this room. How much should we ask? I have no idea. And I have to say that regularly, because the specifics of a project, you have to really dig in to know what it is you should ask for the sponsorship price. But a few things that we can definitely say are important. And firstly, the tendency of sport, and I talk about this in the book and to some degree in one of the discussions online and YouTube, the tendency of sport is to add up all of the cost that they experience and then to ask for something to cover the cost until you get to elite sport. And then it flips, as it should probably, to what is the value of this sponsorship worth to my potential buyer in terms of relationship? To this partner, what is the value that we offer? And so I encourage, when I'm working with the sports side, for them to think about what is your value? What is your value proposition first, versus here are all the things we have to pay for at the end of the day, and we want to ask for sponsorships that cover these things. And so I try to move that toward in the discussion. The other thing that's important that we found some time ago, and it still is the case, is to understand the marketing value for your potential sponsor and what it is that they're seeking, rather than trying to price out something that works for you as the sport, but is not optimal for the brand. And your pricing strategy usually suffers because they take pieces of the package apart and dismiss them, and you lose probably the price you'd like to have for the things that remain. And in that negotiation, you lose your pricing standing.
Right. Well, that's great to know. Just so you know, Jesse clarified here that he's trying to raise revenue for sports programs for high schools.
There you go. Mm-hmm. Then definitely coming together as a group is probably to your advantage, and not going singularly. If you want to look at an example, I would encourage you to look at the IHS model, the International High School model. They oftentimes create an international high school that spans several schools, and it becomes an additional school in which students at these schools are enrolled, but their programming is developed through that collaboration, and they work with that model, and you could find some of their models.
Right. Thank you. I want to ask you about also content marketing, because what we see more and more, a few years ago, brands were relying on sports properties and to working with them, and you see more and more the brands creating their own content.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Red Bull is the prime example of that, and
It would be.
and there are others. Is there a tendency that is that a trend, actually, a clear trend happening in that area? Are brands moving money that was going towards more classical sports sponsorship and creating their own content, or is that money on top of that? What can you tell us about that?
I think that trend has actually been around for some time and even predates Red Bull, but Red Bull made it big, right? And I do think brands are interested in generating their own content. They, sometimes have that toss-up of, do we do this internally or do we hire someone externally? And I do think that's a trend in creating their own content and developing their own events. However, there's also recognition that sometimes it's the people, and I think maybe a larger overarching trend that the 2020 pandemic has brought us is to connect with the people behind the activity, whoever they are. So sport may have gone quiet and silent, but the athletes were still there trying to train. A swimmer's up on her, dining room table trying to practice whatever, and just putting those on TikTok or putting them on Instagram and explaining what's happening. So I think the trend toward content that is orchestrated and delivering brand message is kind of merging with the trend toward influencers, because they understand that they're still active and it's possible to develop a program with them. So I think your point is well taken, but I think for me right now, overshadowing that is the influencer discussion. And I think it's big for sport. In fact, it's so big, I'm working on a book on influencers, because sport sponsorship may be circumnavigated by influencers.
Right.
If you want to avoid the cost of an event and also make sure that this person can still speak and be involved, then you're going to be working with them directly.
Yeah, well, there comes Rule 40 of the IOC regulations as well, that has all to do with that, and I think that's been a bit loosened up as well, giving more freedom to athletes to leverage on their own brand, but in a way to kind of keep the games still safe. Do you want to just touch on that a little? Maybe any comments on that, on what the IOC is doing with that?
Yeah, well, the change to allow athletes to speak about, promote, mention the brands that help them to get, for example, to the Olympics, it only seems right to have had a brand that's been with you for 10 years through all your struggles when you were small and not worth the notice of a big brand, and then to have to ditch them in your moment of glory seemed wrong. And I was certainly on the outside of the athletes in that regard. Right. It did open up a different kind of relationship in terms of the Olympics, a similar kind of relationship we've already mentioned with NIL in the United States, this change toward there being more potential for the individual. Well, all of that was already happening. Add to that the sudden hiatus in sport for a bit, and you really sort of jump-started all of that in a different way. Here's the relationship that I might want to have, and sponsorship is not going to be abandoned in the sense of the media coverage of large events and brand loyalty related to teams and all that. Not going to disappear, but there is, I think, not a watershed event, but a change in the tide where brands are saying, we need to better understand how we can have relationships with athletes in particular.
Definitely. I think that's clear. We have a question from Jimmy Castillo.
Okay.
It's a two-part question. So in 2016, you talked about the potential of esports. In 2020, before the pandemic, in your book, you mentioned that the popularity of esports has already notably pushed the sponsorship price upwards. And then he continues, what would the prices be like when the pandemic made esports an unstoppable trend? Now everyone wants a piece of the pie. How can both rights holders and brands demonstrate authenticity? And that's an important word in your work. We were talking sort of before, and that's something that's definitely very important for the brands to take care of, authenticity. But maybe let's talk about then esports and the prices, and answer to Jimmy.
So esports, you have to remember, it is still in the sponsorship world very small in terms of the investment in the money. That said, wow, talk about jump-starting something, right? The pricing is going up, and the activities are expanding. Esports as well. Some of the events that would have had people attending were also hurt by that pandemic, but a lot continued, and a lot of brands that hadn't thought about esports did, and a lot of brands already invested more heavily. So I think the authenticity issue was enormous at first, and the only thing that esports in the United States could garner in terms of sponsors were a sort of EMIC already involved in game consoles or games and things like that. But when the jump was made on 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 6 now, financial services brands, auto brands, on and on and on and on, became interested in, and there was a change in what you might imagine as EMIC. There are some brands that still struggle a little bit with esports to try to imagine themselves in that space, but there are always brands that don't have a persona, don't have a relationship with people so that they can enter these spaces easily. That's always the case. But esports that's opened up in terms of what would be considered authentic. That said, you still have spokespeople sometimes who will make amazing foot-in-mouth kinds of comments about esports, not knowing or understanding them, that reveal that they're buying it as a media buy versus really investing in the relationship. So and then the pandemic gave fuel to that in that they could continue. And I think that you had a lot of brands then turning to hire in esports, on the brand side, to someone who could imagine working with the team that they're sponsoring, not simply sponsoring a team, but hiring someone inside with the relationships they need in order to make it work in a more fluid fashion, to be more authentic.
Cool. Thank you for that. Just a quick question here from Al Sakat. What was the name of the model again? Is it international, high school?
Yeah, so International high schools offer an international baccalaureate. So,
but when we did that, you answered to Jesse about the model of it was international high school something. What was the third word? Do you remember?
So I was referring to the challenge to offer all of the requirements for an international baccalaureate in any one school.
All right.
And so what they do is they form an international high school.
Okay.
And that international high school is a separate program, like a separate school, in terms of the students' enrollment. But it's an amalgamation of all the high schools because they still need these basic pieces, but they must pass the international baccalaureate degree in order to receive that diploma. And so it becomes, if you will, a school across schools, which is exactly what I think you're interested in.
Right. Cool. There's one more question here from Alexandre. Actually, we're heading to the end of the show, so if you do have any more questions, this is the time. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. There's one from Alexandre Diaz, works here with us at iWorkinSport.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, how do you see the role of big sponsorship? Not sure what that term is, but maybe you do. If not, Alexandre will have to explain. With the growth of digital media and a kind of small actions or promotions all over the world being sold geographically. Do you know what the big sponsorship is that he's referring to?
Yeah, I'm presuming that's your sort of Manchester United and that sort of thing, where you're in the
right.
The elite sport area. I do believe that this trend and the point is well taken, for smaller sponsorship relationships that are more tightly focused, in part merging with the trend for influencer marketing and individuals to be the point of interest. And some of that, sort of grassroots sponsorship for smaller sports or more narrow sports, it almost must come through a person. And so that's where you have that integration there. And I do believe there's more of that, but then the challenge is kind of like the IMG Learfield discussion. How does a brand manager manage all of those sort of micro relationships? And then you have a group like if Twitter come in, for example, and they help you find those people and find those relationships in a clearinghouse kind of situation. You'll see more of that for sure.
Okay, so that is a trend, Alexandre Diaz, a great friend. Now, we're pretty much at the 1 hour mark. It flew by. It went super quick. There was some...
time flies when you're having fun, right?
Exactly. Time flies when you're having fun. Exactly. And so I want to thank everyone that is watching now or watching the replay. Thanks for sending your questions in, and really appreciate you being here as well, Bettina.
My pleasure.
Jimmy for helping making this possible. And I want to remind everyone that the University of Oregon will be as well at the iWorkinSport Education Virtual Expo from the 10th to the 12th of November. It's online, so you can access from wherever you are in the world. And we have a very international audience, as you saw, Bettina.
Indeed.
So there's a link in the description. There's also a link below to Bettina's YouTube channel. So I recommend you click on it, subscribe to that as well. That will add a lot of value. So everyone that is here until the end that is super interested in sponsorship, I truly recommend that you go there and subscribe to her channel. If you want to show your appreciation to Bettina and to myself, to the channel, hit that like button there. Subscribe to our channel too. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to get the notifications for the next videos. And yes, and tomorrow we're going to be ending this week of live interviews we'll be back to the theme of Meet the Programs. So we'll be specifically about the FIFA Master tomorrow. I'll be welcoming a good friend of mine, Kevin Talek Marston, to talk about that program. And yeah, so I hope to see everyone there then. And Bettina, I would love to keep in touch, and I look forward to having Jared and the team from at the University of Oregon participating at the event in 2 weeks' time.
He's totally excited. Mm-hmm.
It was a pleasure.
Mm.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Mm.